The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development. Mr. Speaker, firms like RIM, Keen, Registered.com, Citco, and other IT companies are welcome players in the Nova Scotia provincial economy. Registered.com is expanding in Yarmouth and opening a Halifax office with public assistance from Economic Development and Nova Scotia Business Inc. There is strong demand for IT employees here in Nova Scotia, and the average weekly pay is $964 a week. A week, Mr. Speaker. So my question for the minister is this. With such good employment opportunities, can the minister explain why Mount St. Vincent has stopped taking applicants for its IT program since almost no one wanted to enroll?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can certainly look into that matter and provide a reply for the honourable member.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on her first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the IT sector in Nova Scotia was worth $3 billion in 2006, and it's bigger now, Mr. Speaker. It employs over 14...
Order, please. Order, please. The member for Halifax Needham has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It employs over 14,000 Nova Scotians. But industry groups across North America and here in Nova Scotia are worried. They're facing a serious labour shortage in tech workforce. And Mr. Speaker, even the community college two-year program is not full and is having difficulty filling their seats, Mr. Speaker. And the Minister of Justice should check into that. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister, will the Department of... Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister, will the Department of Labour and the Minister for Workforce Development encourage Nova Scotians to get the skills they need to enter the tech workforce?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, yesterday I did a resolution about the 10th anniversary of Techsploration. Techsploration is aimed at getting women to take an interest and to plan for careers in skilled trade industries, and it's been a very, very successful program. And I'm glad the honourable member asked the question, because one of the biggest challenges facing this province is the demographic one in regard to skilled workers, and that's why the new Department of Labour and Workforce Development was put together, and I'm very, very proud to serve that department. And that department has wonderful programs that are working at this. Well, no, she didn't vote for that, but Techsploration is one such program that I spoke about yesterday that is a very successful program.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on her final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I believe the record will show that this caucus supported the bill on the floor setting up the new department. Mr. Speaker, the province has put millions of public dollars into encouraging the development of the IT sector. But we don't seem to be putting the same amount of effort into ensuring that these companies will be staffed. And, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue. The department's business plan doesn't even specifically identify the need for more IT workers. So I'd like the minister to tell the House, Mr. Speaker, what concrete steps his government will take to meet the need for skilled workers in the growing Nova Scotia IT sector.
Honourable Minister of Labour, Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm really pleased that the honourable member has seen fit to speak about the success of our economic development strategy in this province. Mr. Speaker, we have been indeed very successful in attracting a large number of IT jobs to this province. And Mr. Speaker, we do so because the companies who have decided to invest here with us have the confidence that the Nova Scotia workforce will be able to provide them with the skills they need in order to be competitive in the high-tech world, Mr. Speaker. They're here because they have confidence in Nova Scotia. We have confidence in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and we have a lot more confidence in Nova Scotia than that party exhibits, especially when you hear the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto saying that NSBI doesn't get it. Mr. Speaker, they do get it, and they bring the jobs to this province, and we're going to continue expanding those jobs.
The Honourable the member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, renewable energy producers in this province are still waiting for the green light from this government to produce and sell directly to Nova Scotia customers. The Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee made this recommendation to the government back in 2003. Yet 4 years later, and 4 ministers of energy later, no progress has been made. Communities such as Forshoe in Richmond County were excited about the prospect of building a wind turbine and have the energy provided directly to them. The only thing that stands in the way of making this a reality is the Minister of Energy and this Conservative government. So my question to the Minister is, why do you continue to stall on allowing renewable energy producers to sell directly to Nova Scotia customers?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you and all members of the House that we have an open market in this province, and I am not going to interrupt that marketplace that we have in place today.
The Honourable the member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that answer certainly caused more confusion, but I'm sure the Minister of Energy is aware that currently renewable energy producers cannot sell directly to Nova Scotia customers. They have to go through Nova Scotia Power, and I'm assuming he's aware of that. But Mr. Speaker, Recommendation 51 was accepted and applauded in the energy and environment community. It's not just the 2003 committee that made this recommendation. The government's own consultant recommended that it be implemented back in February of 2007. Large municipalities such as HRM and those in the Strait area want to buy greener power directly. Large industrials want to buy greener power directly, but for some reason this government won't let them. So my question again to the Minister is, why are you stepping in the way of Nova Scotians who want to purchase greener power directly?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can tell the member and all members that this government is working very favourable of having more renewable energy in our province. We are proposing that we're going to have approximately 300 generators and wind turbines in this province within the next 5 years, Mr. Speaker. $1 billion in private investment in this province, and the Nova Scotia Power is regulated by the UARB, Mr. Speaker, and it's working very fine in this province as we speak.
The Honourable the member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, during estimates, the Minister of Energy on this very subject indicated that he was waiting for a report to make a decision on whether he would allow renewable energy producers to sell directly to Nova Scotia customers. The message today seems to be from the Minister that he's quite content with having Nova Scotia Power control renewable energy in this province and not allow communities such as Forshoe or communities everywhere else in Nova Scotia who want to see green power that they can buy directly and they can invest in. So my question to the Premier, if your Minister of Energy has abandoned the concept of allowing renewable energy producers to sell directly to Nova Scotia customers, are you going to intervene in this matter, or is it your government's new position to allow Nova Scotia Power to not only have its monopoly on our energy, but now monopolize renewable energy in our province for good?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate what the member's saying, and I did mention that we are waiting for the report. When that report's out, I will review the report, and I'll be making recommendations to my Premier and my Cabinet colleagues. But as the market stands today, I stand firm on my decision.
The Honourable the member for Dartmouth North.
Minister of Community Services. The Minister appears to be very proud of her government's 10-year childcare plan, but I thought the Minister might like to know what they're doing for childcare in Manitoba. So I'll table the details for the Minister's information. Just a few highlights, Mr. Speaker. The minister's plan calls for 1,000 spaces in the next 5 years. Manitoba is creating 6,500 new spaces in the same period of time. So my question to the minister through you, Mr. Speaker, is why does her plan fall so short of what a province nearly the same size as Nova Scotia is doing to build its childcare system?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to rise today and speak about the successful childcare plan that we have here in Nova Scotia. And I repeat, Mr. Speaker, here in Nova Scotia, for it is indeed the families and the children of Nova Scotia that this government have the concern about, Mr. Speaker. The families and the children of Nova Scotia that this government has invested over $200 million in, and the families and children of Nova Scotia that this government will continue to invest wisely in, Mr. Speaker, from one end of this province to the other. I am in full awareness of the report from Manitoba. While I have the utmost respect for my colleagues across the country, my concern is for the children and the families of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable member for Dartmouth North on his final first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, wait, there's more. Nova Scotia only offers workers short-term stabilization grants, and we've seen that from this government. Manitoba is giving wage increases directly to childcare workers and setting a minimum pay scale and increasing benefits by 20%. They're building 35 more childcare centres in available space in schools. This adds childcare to rural communities, while also allowing them to keep their local schools open. Mr. Speaker, in half the time and for $30 million less than the minister's half-measure 10-year plan. No wonder we voted on this side for the lackluster promises that government's made. So my final question, to this minister, when will she admit, Mr. Speaker, that her plan is spending more money and we're getting less in this province for childcare workers?
Order, please. The time for oral question period has expired. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, during question period on a number of occasions, the Minister of Health said that the review of intensive care services in Nova Scotia did not have a recommendation with respect to the Glace Bay ICU. I'd like to table this document, specifically draw the Minister's attention to the part that says the consultants recommend that the current model, which describes Glace Bay unit as an ICU, is not viable in the long term, and that a more appropriate classification would be the immediate care unit or enhanced nursing observation unit. Mr. Speaker, I will table it just for the minute to be helpful to the Minister, of course.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there is a blatant missing the point, and trying to read between lines, trying to get things that are not there. Mr. Speaker, there is no intention of this government to be closing ICUs, and maybe he should retract that and apologize to the citizens of Glace Bay.
I would say that that's not a point of order, no. But the information has been passed on, and the Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Thank you. Please call Bill number 127, the Health Professions Disciplinary Proceedings Protection Act.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Bill number 127, the Health Professions Disciplinary Proceedings Protection Act.
Bill 127. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, very pleased to stand today to speak to Bill number 127, which is Emergency Health Services Act. Mr. Speaker, before I start, I do want to thank my colleagues for this, especially the member for Cumberland South, for bringing this to my attention, the Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal. Mr. Speaker, to quickly speak to the Emergency Health Services Act, its proposed amendments establish the Nova Scotia Long Service Award Medal for paramedics and other people involved in providing emergency medical health services. 127?
127.
Emergency Health Services Act.
Murder, 127, the Health Professions Disciplinary Proceedings Protection.
All right, there we go. I can give you the same speech maybe for the next one. All right, maybe we can call them. All right. I know I don't have those notes here.
As the minister found his place.
I think I can move second reading on this. Again, this is a bill that basically adds a number of amendments to different colleges that we have in this province. Last session, we did make an amendment that allowed civil or disciplinary hearing information to remain with the college in that disciplinary hearing, so that information doesn't automatically be sent over to a civil proceeding in case a patient or somebody who has felt that they've been misrepresented, that they can take a civil action against that person. Mr. Speaker, this looks at approximately 12 new colleges, or I believe 14 different colleges, and adding that provision to them so that the information of patients are protected. What we find in some of these disciplinary hearings is that patients are unwilling at times to come forward with information to that disciplinary hearing because of fear of that information is going to be held off or sent off to a civil proceeding. So, Mr. Speaker, this is something that has been run through all the colleges. It has been asked for by these professional organizations to have this added to their legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a larger piece that will add that to 14 different colleges in this province so that they have the same protections as doctors, nurses, and other organizations. And with that, I move second reading.
The Honourable the member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to stand and speak on Bill 127. This piece of legislation was introduced to amend various statutes that provided for the regulation of health professions, Mr. Speaker. And this is something that has been definitely an issue and a concern with me over the years. One reason why I think I'm here in this legislature today to talk about issues from healthcare workers and about healthcare workers and about frontline healthcare workers and the healthcare professions throughout this province, Mr. Speaker. This piece of legislation, which we seen a similar legislation back in the fall of last year, pertained to just solely physicians. So this one I would suggest that we're seeing this piece of legislation today because of what I don't think happened in the original piece of legislation that we seen in the fall was to capture the audience, really the true audience that legislation that we passed in the fall should have captured. Not just solely pertaining to physicians in this province. Even though physicians and their college and their regulatory body is important, but so are all the other disciplines and all the other professions here in this province, Mr. Speaker. Professions like the chiropractors in their act and their regulations, Mr. Speaker. This piece of legislation will address and add some clarity to their proceedings on how they go about ruling on certain items in their profession, Mr. Speaker. It also talks about the Dental Act and their regulatory body, Mr. Speaker, something that we talked about and I talked about in this House when that process was going through the legislative process here in the House to recognize the dentists in this province and also the dental hygienists, Mr. Speaker, who recently became certified or recognized by the government as a regulatory body to oversee conduct and competency in that profession, which is a vital key profession in this province. We've said that in the past, and I think we need to recognize that. We also know that this piece of legislation will deal with and change the Dispensing Optician Act, which something I stood in this House and talked about several years ago, I believe, when we seen that profession get regulated through the regulatory body and the legislative process here in this province. Also, the medical laboratory technology Act, which I think was enacted several years before I was elected as a member, but ultimately another important group of healthcare providers here in this province, one that I know play a vital role in the healthcare system and delivery and the treatment of Nova Scotians here in this province. And I've criticized the government and the minister several times around the need to ensure, Mr. Speaker, ensure that these frontline workers, like the medical laboratory technologists, X-ray technologists, ultrasound, those who work in cytology, Mr. Speaker, paramedics, nurses, continuing care workers are all asked how to improve our system here in Nova Scotia and what can work and what doesn't work. Far too often, changes come from government in the healthcare system and in the delivery of healthcare system that if they would have attempted to ask those who actually are delivering the service if it was a good change, they would have realized that it was the wrong road to go down and it was the wrong approach to take, Mr. Speaker. This piece of legislation also changes a number of professions and their regulatory bodies. But one that I'm concerned about, and I'll bring to the attention of the Minister and the Government, is the Paramedic Act, and the which was the act respecting the practice of paramedicine here in this province. I worked years ago, before I was elected, Mr. Speaker, with the Nova Scotia College of Paramedics, which was a group of paramedics across this province who were working hard to try to get the attention of government to ensure that the profession of paramedicine here in this province is properly recognized and recognized as an important part of the healthcare system here in Nova Scotia. And I've said it earlier in question period and many times about the lack of, I think, of respect shown to this profession over the years. And that's why I'm here today, Mr. Speaker, standing in my place as a former paramedic, Mr. Speaker, because of those actions from government and from this government. I know the Minister of Health wasn't part of that government at the time of the labour dispute of the paramedics, but many of his colleagues were, Mr. Speaker, and many paramedics stood up and finally said that was enough. We need to be recognized in this province. We need to be looked upon as an important key component of the healthcare delivery here in this province, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud to say that I'm here today in the NDP caucus as a paramedic, as a frontline healthcare worker, Mr. Speaker, because of the work that this caucus has done over the years to promote the needs and the ambitions and the professions like paramedics and nurses and all through the allied health professions, Mr. Speaker. And I bring forward the concerns around the Paramedic Act because we passed that legislation, Mr. Speaker. I believe the first reading for that was back in April of 2005. And then the second reading and third reading after that, a third reading was on May 16, 2005. And today, as we stand here, as I stand here today, they still haven't implemented that college. They're working on it. Several years later, we're going 3 years after we passed that legislation, that the College of Paramedics here in Nova Scotia is still not up and running and operating to oversee the professions of paramedics. But yet we have a piece of legislation here that's actually going to change that act that I passed, that I think everybody in this House voted for, but yet we don't see them implementing the regulations, the policies, the direction of a college. So I'm taking this opportunity to make sure the Minister of Health, and I know he's listening, and the government recognize what is taking so long. It's over 3 years since we passed that in this House, and that profession deserves to get the rightful recognition they deserve with the operation of this college. So we support these changes. They're important changes, and I'm glad to see finally it wasn't just geared around one profession, like I said earlier, the physicians of this province, but he talked about all the professions of healthcare and the regulatory bodies that are created here in this province. So I'll end on ensuring, and hopefully the Minister listened to me about the Paramedic Act, and ensure hopefully he can have some influence on maybe looking at and influencing the fact that this needs to come to full turn, Mr. Speaker, and have that regulatory body up and running for the paramedics of this province. So we will support this piece of legislation going through the legislative process, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward to any input that any of these professions might have on this amendment to the regulatory bodies.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We in the Liberal caucus believe that this bill has been developed in order to best meet the needs of Nova Scotians. Self-regulating professions must have the power to honestly and openly address complaints and disciplinary issues, and complainants and others feel the need to feel that they are able to speak in confidence as well. The information they share will remain between the college and the healthcare professional involved in the proceeding. Mr. Speaker, the bill also ensures that the separation between college proceedings and civil proceedings, as it currently is available for physicians, nurses, and LPNs and respiratory technologists, that is extended to other healthcare professionals as well. Mr. Speaker, investigative and disciplinary proceedings are intended to regulate the profession and protect the public interest. The purpose of civil proceedings is different. Specific methods for the discovery of evidence exist with that process, and standards for evidence and testimony in each of these proceedings are very different. Mr. Speaker, we in the Liberal caucus fully support self-regulating healthcare professions, and this type of legislation will ensure a more open and accountable investigative process that serves the best interests of the public. Then this is a good step forward. So, Mr. Speaker, we support this going through the process of the Law Amendments Committee, and we look forward to hearing individuals and organizations with regard to their thoughts on this particular piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Health. It will be to close debate on Bill number 127. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too want to thank the members opposite for their interventions on second reading when it comes to Bill number 127, Health Professions Disciplinary Proceedings Protection Act. Mr. Speaker, to the member from Sackville-Cobequid, I know there is some frustration in that college right now in getting the final regulations approved and moving. I know that the department is working in conjunction with the group of paramedics to make sure that that bill is proclaimed as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, yes, but this at the same time does make some changes to it. Mr. Speaker, I know the member opposite speaks from the heart when he talks about frontline healthcare workers, especially when it comes to paramedics. And Mr. Speaker, I know he also knows that I have a number of friends who are paramedics that work out of the Yarmouth and Pumlico bases. Mr. Speaker, I do take opportunities to ride along with them and help them out as well as often as I can. And I want to make sure that they have the best possible legislation to protect them and their patients in case of some disciplinary issues. And that is what this Act truly does for all the professions that are listed therein. Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the members opposite for their interventions, and I want to close discussion on second reading on Bill number 127.
Thank you. The motion is for second reading on Bill number 127, Health Professions Disciplinary Proceeding Protection Act 2008. Is the House ready for the question? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried.
Bill number 127, an act respecting the protection of confidential disciplinary proceedings of health professions.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 130, Emergency Health Services Act?
Bill number 130, the Emergency Health Services Act. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I apologize for a little bit of a mess up there, but I know I had been given you speaking notes on this bill, and I deleted the wrong ones out of my book. So you know what? Sometimes people are human when it comes to paperwork. So, Mr. Speaker, very pleased to stand today on a second reading of an amendment to the Emergency Health Services Act. It particularly is fitting that this should come up in the House so soon after the Emergency Medical Services Week across the country. The proposed amendments establishes the Nova Scotia Long Service Medal for paramedics and other people involved in providing emergency medical health services. This proposed amendment establishes the Nova Scotia Long Service Medal for paramedics and other people who are involved in providing emergency medical health services. And I'm sure many of you can remember a time in this province when our ambulance system was very different. We've been lucky here in Nova Scotia to take part in a significant transition over the past decade from a fragmented ambulance system with many private operators to one of the best pre-hospital services in North America, and I'd say the best in North America, with an integrated provincial ground ambulance, air ambulance, and medical first response program. Mr. Speaker, I know the member opposite worked in one of those paramedic organizations. I know the member for Hants West worked in as a paramedic in one of these organizations prior to the new system starting. Mr. Speaker, I tell people this story quite often that it was actually in Southwest, in Yarmouth in particular, it was actually the two funeral homes that ran the ambulance. Mr. Speaker, people are incredulous when I tell them that. You know, how can it possibly be? It's sort of a system that really maybe wasn't based upon taking care of patients, but trucking them off to somewhere else. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we've gone in leaps and bounds in the last number of years to the best pre-hospital system in North America. You know, EHS paramedics and staff have worked very hard over the past few years to achieve accreditation for both the air and ground ambulance programs, an achievement for paramedics, providers, and all Nova Scotians to be proud of. There are hundreds of men and women putting their significant skills, training, and compassion to work each and every day, saving lives, improving health outcomes, and educating communities. It is for these people who have dedicated their life to helping others that I put forward the amendment for the establishment of the Nova Scotia Long Service Medal for paramedics and other people involved in the provision of emergency health services. And as I started off a little while ago, when I incorrectly started with this bill, I was thanking the member for Cumberland South for bringing this issue to my attention, the member for Hants West for bringing this to my attention, and I think it's long overdue that paramedics do have that long service medal. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of Bill number 130.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand this evening and talk about Bill 130, especially since it pertains particularly to the great number of men and women here in our province who work as paramedics throughout this province, in some of the smallest communities in this province to the urban centres like Halifax and Sydney, Mr. Speaker. The paramedics are there to serve the people of this province, Mr. Speaker, and they should be recognized. And their work and their longevity in this service should be recognized, because it is a hard environment to work in, Mr. Speaker. I spent 8 years in the system before I got elected, and I know the member across the way spent many more years from Hants West in the system that wasn't great for your family, wasn't great for the individual, and even today, Mr. Speaker, with the pressures placed upon these healthcare providers, these paramedics, these men and women who work every day and every minute of the day on Christmas, on the holidays, to make sure they're there for their fellow citizens, Mr. Speaker. Their working environment is extremely dangerous, extremely stressful, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to take this opportunity to maybe talk a little bit more in depth around what paramedics in this province deal with on a continuing basis, Mr. Speaker. I stand in this House over the last almost 5 years, Mr. Speaker, at every chance I have to make sure that the paramedics of this province get a voice here in this legislature, because for far too long they were just consumed within the other healthcare workers. No offense to nurses and doctors, but they seem to get the most of the headlines when government and opposition members and anybody in the legislature talked about healthcare workers. But those individuals, the paramedics in this province, are a key component to the initial stages of someone needing help in this province, Mr. Speaker. And some of the problems that they've had over the years have been directly contributed from this government and other governments, Mr. Speaker. Not recognizing this profession in the most appropriate way, Mr. Speaker, was a disjustice on these individuals who work so much in this province, Mr. Speaker. I remember when I started my career, I worked 68 hours a week, working 24 hours on, 24 hours off, and 48 hours in a row on every other weekend, Mr. Speaker. Can you just imagine, at the end of that 48 hours, Mr. Speaker, having those paramedics arrive at your door to provide emergency care? And I worked for Arshill's Ambulance originally, Mr. Speaker, in the old system. So I was maybe fortunate enough, some might say I wasn't, to work in both systems. Knowing the changes that needed to take place and knowing the changes that took place, I can honestly say, and I will say today, that the system is better today than it was some 8, 10, 12 years ago, Mr. Speaker, and the paramedics are appreciative of that. But they do have concerns, and we hear about it every day. I talk to them all the time, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the member from Hants West talks to his colleagues and former colleagues, and he knows, and the government should know that they have concerns. Last year, for example, Mr. Speaker, the contract for the paramedics was up, and they went to arbitration for their wages, and they were upset. They were upset that they felt that they didn't get what they deserved. And I know for myself, I fought for years to be recognized as a profession here in Nova Scotia and be recognized to have a fair wage and be treated fairly for a system that we have here in this province, province-wide system, to look at other districts that had similar sizes, similar call volumes, and have a wage comparable to that. And we're still not there. And one of the most frustrating things for paramedics, Mr. Speaker, is that they hear continuously from this government and from me, because I say it often, that we have the best paramedic service in North America. We do. I can honestly say that, and the people of this province can be reassured that we do have the best paramedic service in North America, Mr. Speaker. But the problem when we hear this from the government time and time again is that the fact, if you ask paramedics if they think they have the best paramedic service in North America, they'll agree. But if you ask them if they're compensated like the best ambulance service in North America, they'll say no, Mr. Speaker. They'll say no. And that's a role the government needs to play, have a role in. They need to ensure that if they're going to promote our paramedics and our service here in this province as the best across North America, then they should ensure that they're paid equally, Mr. Speaker, and they recognize that, and they should work on that. And I hope in the next round, when paramedics go for their contract talks, that the government recognizes that. Because the pressures that I talked about earlier on the extended hours that they work, Mr. Speaker, the calls they go on, Mr. Speaker, paramedics deal with life and death situations every day. In the middle of the night, 3 in the morning, Mr. Speaker, they could be in the side of a highway, in a ditch, trying to take someone out of a car who has a compromised airway, who, if they do not do their work properly and get that individual out of there, that individual will die, Mr. Speaker. They deal with life and death situations every day. And what we hear from this government continuously when we talk or ask the government around situations in the healthcare system, especially around the emergency room closures that we see throughout this province, the government continues, and the minister says that don't worry, those residents shouldn't worry in those communities like Tatamagouche and Pugwash and Glace Bay and Digby and across the province when they have closures, because we have the ambulance service there. Call 911. It's true, we do. But paramedics can only do so much. And there are rules and things that have to happen within a certain amount of time to have a positive end result when you're dealing with emergencies. There's something called the golden hour, Mr. Speaker, when you have a critically ill patient who needs probably an OR, that if you have a paramedic treating them, they have about an hour to get them to a tertiary care hospital or an emergency room where they might need to have invasive procedures, surgery, and other things, Mr. Speaker. So when the government continues to I think, download, really, the responsibility of delivering health care in an emergency room setting to the paramedics, then they should recognize that, and then paramedics should be compensated for it. They're picking up a lot of the slack in this province right now, Mr. Speaker, They are, I can say, continuously preventing catastrophes in this province. Just think about if a bus overturns in Digby. I've been down there many times on that highway, starting to go over the bridge before you get into Digby. A bus of 30, 40 people. Think about if that emergency room is closed and you have one, maybe two ambulances within a radius of that area, Mr. Speaker. What happens then? I mean, we try to plan for the emergencies that will take place in this province, but the system status plan that we have for the ambulance service here in this province right now is really based on call volumes and meeting those targets. Emergency medical care needs to meet a certain call volume or response time. We don't necessarily have a system status plan that will provide coverage to an emergency, like I just said, a bus crash with multiple patients, Mr. Speaker, and what happens, just what happens if that accident happens just outside Digby and that emergency room is closed. Those paramedics, 2 of them on one ambulance, Mr. Speaker, just 2 of them, have to triage and treat 40 patients. Then we have one helicopter, Mr. Speaker, that it's going to take some time to get from Halifax to Digby, even in a helicopter, Mr. Speaker, to get there, Mr. Speaker. And what we do is we call upon other areas. Farther down from your area in Clare, those paramedics would be responding to that bus accident. The paramedics in Yarmouth, right around, probably Shelburne. We might even see the paramedic unit from Bridgewater crossing over to go to that major accident. And what happens then, Mr. Speaker, is that those other areas have a reduced service. And, you know, if there's another emergency, what happens if there's 2 buses that crash, Mr. Speaker, by Digby and one in Bridgewater? That's a situation that nobody wants to see, but we have to recognize that it's the potential, Mr. Speaker. I was called late at night when Swiss Air crashed off St. Margaret's Bay, Mr. Speaker, and every ambulance, most of the ambulances in the province, were going towards Peggy's Cove in that area to try to maybe assist any survivors, which we ultimately know there was none. And I was called at home to go down to the closest fire department and try to get some gear together as much as I could to ride on the apparatus of the fire service in case there was any calls. But fortunately, that night, there was hardly any calls in the province. It was a quiet night, and we were lucky. We were lucky, Mr. Speaker. But those paramedics are there to work at any time to respond to those emergencies, like Swiss Air, Mr. Speaker, like maybe a bus accident outside Digby, or in a ditch off a highway in Yarmouth. Those individuals, those men and women who are working every day here in this province, put themselves in harm's way every day to hopefully protect every one of us here in this province. So it's important that we recognize that, and it's important that we recognize the legislation that we've been working on for years, as I mentioned in the previous bill, around the regulatory body or the legislation of the paramedic college here in the province. We passed that piece of legislation 3 years ago, Mr. Speaker, in 2005. But yet that regulatory body is still not up and running. What does that tell to paramedics? What kind of message does that give paramedics? So when they see that happen, they're upset. They get angry. They're PO'd at the government, because ultimately it's a government's responsibility when we pass legislation in this chamber and it goes through the process that they implement it, Mr. Speaker. And that's just one example of the frustrations paramedics have seen over years of I think, not being recognized as a profession and an important part and component of the healthcare system here in Nova Scotia. Paramedic scope of practice, Mr. Speaker, has come a long way. The minister made mention in the start of his comments around the old system, where a lot of the paramedic services were out of funeral homes. I mean, it's kind of ironic. You have a funeral home and then you have an ambulance service dealing with corpses and dealing with injured people. And we needed a change, and we've seen that change, Mr. Speaker. And from those days where an emergency medical assistant, I think, or technologist, or assistant, I think, EMS, or emergency medical assistant, I think it was about a 2-week course. EMA, sorry, Mr. Speaker, it was EMA. It was a 2-week course. So if you could have, you could be riding around this province in an ambulance on a 2-week course providing medical care, kind of scary. But some of those individuals have toughened it out, came through the changes that we've seen, upgraded, went back to school, learned, Mr. Speaker, what emergency care really has to offer, especially the patients that we see here in Nova Scotia, and their scope of practice have changed dramatically over the last 10 years, 15 years, Mr. Speaker. We have paramedics that can show up at your door no matter where you're at, in the smallest little town in rural communities here in Nova Scotia, and restart your heart if your heart stops, Mr. Speaker. They can give you medications to stop a seizure, Mr. Speaker, which if left untreated, you could actually die from, Mr. Speaker. You have paramedics that can respond to the Highlands and intubate an individual who stopped breathing, Mr. Speaker. And we're talking about seniors, adults, children, Mr. Speaker. The paramedics provide an extremely amount of service, and their scope of practice have extended greatly and expanded over the last number of years, Mr. Speaker. And we continue to see more pressures added to them. But paramedics love it. They love to increase and become more knowledgeable on what the new procedures are in emergency care throughout the world, Mr. Speaker. And many of them are workaholics. A lot of colleagues of mine will work their regular shift and go in and work extra time, Mr. Speaker. It's just in their blood, I guess, that they love the profession, and I did too, Mr. Speaker. And when I said earlier in the start of my comments around working the 68 hours a week, I would have done it all over again. I love the fact that I was doing that job and I worked that many hours. I might not go back and work 68 hours a week, especially a 48-hour shift on the weekend. I must say I probably would never do that again. But at the time, I was younger. I was interested in the profession, and I would have done it. And I would have done it again if we could turn back time, Mr. Speaker. Part of the problem, and I think what we need to see and government need to recognize, other than just recognizing the long service of paramedics, is the use of paramedics in this province. We can use paramedics from one end of this province to address some of the concerns and the immediate concerns that we have in delivery of health care, especially in emergency rooms, Mr. Speaker. So I don't know if everybody knows, but paramedics work in the emergency departments in Nova Scotia. At the QE2 down the road here, they've been working there since the place opened. And previous to that, they were working in the old VG hospital emergency room, Mr. Speaker, working in triaging patients coming in, assessing them and their acuity level of where they needed to go, who needed to see them, and in how much time they needed to have that done, Mr. Speaker. They've been working in the city for a long time, but that was not the norm throughout the province. There's still, I think, a lot of the emergency rooms across this province could utilize the expertise and the professionalism of paramedics in the emergency departments. Recently, quite recently, one of my first partner, Mr. Speaker, and a partner of the member from Halifax West, or Hants West, Halifax West. Hants West recently took a job, I believe, in the Dartmouth General, where they've started to have base paramedics working out of there, Mr. Speaker. And those paramedics who work at the Dartmouth General and at the QE2 provide a great service. They go around intubating people. They're on the team that or the crash team that will attend to somebody who might be in cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest, Mr. Speaker. So they're playing an important role in Dartmouth General now and at the QE2. And I know my former partner, just before I left to get involved in politics, Mr. Speaker, is working at the Cobequid Centre as an orthotech. Who works on patients who might need casting and other things in that department. But that's the urban setting. Why can't we use that in more of the rural settings where we're seeing a problem with emergency closures, lack of health care providers to work in those facilities, Mr. Speaker? We need to exploit the paramedics of this province. We need to put them to work. Why do we have paramedics on the trucks in some areas that are very quiet when we should be putting them to work more? They might not like me for those comments right now, but I don't mean take the truck and put them there. Add another shift. Add another paramedic shift to the hospital, for example, so that another paramedic might be in that area. And I think it could work greatly in our rural communities. We look at Long and Briar Island, and we have nurse practitioners working there with paramedics, with extended scope of practice. And that pilot project, even though it's only in one area, and I do not understand why the Minister of Health and this government doesn't exploit that pilot project. And maybe it was the former Minister of Health 2 times over or 3 times over, might have had some input in 2 times over input in that. But why aren't we seeing that all over this province? Nurse practitioners, paramedics, and these paramedics had extended scope of practice, and the satisfaction rate with the residents from that area is immensely, Mr. Speaker. And actually, their numbers of hospital visits to emergency rooms have decreased. Mr. Speaker. At first, I must admit, and the minister and the government would know this, the residents of that area were uneasy, thinking we needed a doctor, and what do we have? We have a nurse and a paramedic. But I can tell you it didn't take long for those individuals to warm up to the idea that these healthcare providers can provide a great service. They can't replace a doctor. Nobody can replace a doctor, Mr. Speaker. But when we have a crisis like we see in Nova Scotia, where we have a limited number of physicians and the recruitment of physicians are so hard, especially to rural communities, then we need to use nurses, nurse practitioners, paramedics, other healthcare workers to fill those gaps, to fill those holes. I'd much rather see a paramedic and a nurse working together on an island just off Nova Scotia to provide healthcare service than to see nothing. To see nothing at all, no physicians, no healthcare workers at all, and then relying on the ambulance service or 911 for any emergencies. So that pilot project should be utilized throughout this province. And I've criticized the government a number of times around the lack of a vision, a lack of a policy around nurse practitioners, and I'm hoping he's listening today, the minister, around the possibilities of the paramedics and their utilization in our rural communities and extend their scope of practice, Mr. Speaker. That experience in Long and Briar Island should be a great model, and I know other jurisdictions across the country have looked at that and are utilizing that. So I don't know why this government hasn't done that. So I brought up a few of the examples of what paramedics are doing today, what their environment is all about, and the need to truly recognize.
Order, please. Certainly, it's very, very difficult for the chair to hear the honourable member speak. So I would ask the honourable members either to lower down their discussion or to take those discussions outside the chamber. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that's why I wanted to bring the attention of the government, the Minister of Health, and all members around the important role that paramedics, the men and women that are here, that are on duty right now across this province, they need to be recognized. They need to have government recognize the importance of their profession. And actions really, Mr. Speaker, actions speak louder than words when you're dealing with the healthcare system here in this province and when you're dealing with paramedicine across this province. So Bill 130 is great. We support it, and our caucus supports it, and I think everybody in this legislature should support it because we need to recognize that profession, and especially the long service of those who provide emergency care in this province, Mr. Speaker. But I hope the minister was listening, and he should go back and talk to his friends that he knows who work in the profession and ask them what they need and what is truly a fair and equity a package when it comes to their next negotiations, Mr. Speaker, so that we can all say, and even him, that we have the best care or best ambulance service in North America, and they actually are paid just as well, Mr. Speaker. So with those few words, I look forward to this piece of legislation passing through the legislative process, and I look forward to encouraging all the paramedics in this province to make sure that they recognize this piece of legislation and they nominate anybody who has a long service here in Nova Scotia.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the honourable member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allow me to summarize. The purpose of the amendment to the Emergency Health Services Act is to establish a long service medal for paramedics and other persons involved in the provision of emergency health services. So, Mr. Speaker, it gives me a tremendous amount of pleasure to stand in my place and participate in this debate on Bill number 130, because this is a good piece of legislation that will honor and respect, Mr. Speaker, what I consider to be some of the real unsung heroes in our healthcare profession. Mr. Speaker, as the previous speaker has told us at great length, day in and day out, paramedics in this province are first to the scene of what can be sometimes very horrific situations. And we ask them to administer health care quickly and professionally, and then we ask them to safely transport those individuals to institutions for additional care. We in the Liberal caucus are proud of these individuals, and we are equally proud of the world-class emergency health care service that was established under a Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, something that the previous speaker perhaps forgot to mention, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I believe it was in British Columbia when two paramedics were honored for their ultimate sacrifice, when it was described that paramedics are part of a heroic brotherhood and sisterhood of keeping people safe, Mr. Speaker. And this particular piece of legislation enables us to recognize the dedication of paramedics and other emergency health personnel, and we in the Liberal caucus are in full support of Bill number 130 as it now moves through the law amendments process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Health will be to close debate on Bill number 130. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the members opposite for their interventions. Just maybe a further comment to a Liberal government that did give us this ambulance system. I do want to give full credit to Ron Stewart, Dr. Ron Stewart, who was Minister of Health at the time, for the work. For what he did, and the forward thinking that he gave to the system, and the information that he had, the knowledge that he had that brought to this system. So I want to thank Ron personally for the work that he did on behalf of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I do before I close want to thank again the member for Hants West. I know as a paramedic and been a paramedic for 17 years. That I know he wants to say a few words on this one as well, but I think he'll save that for third reading. But I know he does have a lot to say about this act and the benefit that it has on acknowledging such hard workers in our healthcare system. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I move a second reading of Bill number 130, Emergency Health Services Act.
Thank you. The motion is for second reading on Bill number 130, Emergency Health Services Act. Is the House ready for the question? The question has been called. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried.
Bill 130, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 2005, the Emergency Health Services Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 131, the North American Labour Corporation Agreement Implementation Act.
Bill number 131. The Chair recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Act is well known to the critics and to the House, and we had a chance to do the bill briefing. So with those few words, I'll take my place and listen to what my critics have to say. And move. No. Do I move it? Yes, I move it.
Thank you. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to stand in my place and speak to this bill. I think that it's unlikely that I'll get through the remarks I have, though, before the moment of interruption. I'm not sure when you're looking at doing that, Mr. Speaker, but I'd be happy to adjourn the debate now for the moment of interruption, and we can return to second reading after that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The debate on Bill number 131 is adjourned until after the moment of interruption. So we have arrived at the moment of interruption. The adjournment debate has been announced earlier and won by the honourable member from Halifax-Chebucto. Therefore, be resolved that the government increase the household income limits used to qualify low-income families in Nova Scotia for home repair programs. The honourable member from Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in my place tonight to speak about an issue that's an issue all through the province of Nova Scotia in dealing with the income levels for people applying for grants for home repairs, whether it's the Seniors Assistance Program, the RAP program, or home repair programs. And Mr. Speaker, and I do know that, you know, the income levels that the department uses are income levels done in cooperation with the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. But also I do know that we do have provincial housing programs that, you know, we have to increase the levels of income. I'll give you an example of a single mother that lives in my riding and has 2 children. One child is in university, the other child is in high school. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. She spoke about getting a grant and applied to the department for a grant. When she applied to the department for the grant, the department sent her back her letter and said she was ineligible. Now, her daughter works as a student in the summertime. She goes to university. So her daughter's income was included in this grant application. But to my surprise, that the single mother, the child tax credit was included in the income of that single mother. So here's a single mother with a daughter in university, another daughter in high school, desperate need of housing repairs. But when they did the income level, it would be an income level for a 3-bedroom, which is under the table, and she was over the limit. They included her daughter, who works in the summer to put herself through university. The mother works 6 months of the year at a gardening center and is laid off for 6 months. And they used the child tax credit plus the student summer employment that she worked for 8 weeks to include it. That put her over the limit. And this is why I speak on this issue today, to increase the household income limits so low-income families can qualify. And then I'll talk about low-income seniors. If 2 seniors live in their own home in this province of Nova Scotia, the income limit is $22,000 for them to be eligible to apply for that grant. So if 2 seniors, if both of them are getting guaranteed income supplement, old age pension, and the Canada pension, the CPP, the old age and the guaranteed income supplement, do you know that they are over the limit by just over $1,500? So here's low, and this is what they're getting. They're getting Canada pension, old age, and guaranteed income supplement. And they're actually over the limit anywhere from $1,300 to $1,500. That's 2 seniors living on low income that are ineligible. Yet we talk as a government, we talk as Legislative Assembly about helping seniors. But yet, with this income level, it hasn't changed in 07, it hasn't changed in 08. It's the same level in 07. But what they did, all seniors across the province of Nova Scotia, the cutoff limit is $22,000. So we all as MLAs would know, and I'll give you an example about just a letter I received last week from a constituent of mine. She's a single lady, husband had passed away, she lives in the Ashby area. She called me to say, look, Gord, I did what you said and I applied for the grant. And I said, well, that's good. She said, but I got this letter back. She said, I'm over, they say, by $289.45. And I said, really? So I asked her I went up and saw her just on the long weekend and asked her to give me the copy of the letter. And I said, here she lives in a modest little 3-bedroom bungalow in Ashby, and she's over by that limit. So, and she's 80 years of age. So how do we get these people to qualify for those grants? The only way that we can get those people to qualify is if we up the limits to let them qualify. But there's such a drastic limit in housing. The limit, I think, is around $35,000 if you live in Halifax for a 2-bedroom household to get a grant. But if you live in Cape Breton, the limit is like $23,500. What a difference in the income. So my feeling on this is that we should have a level playing field for all across the province of Nova Scotia. Whatever the levels of incomes are in the metro area, whatever the level of incomes are in the Yarmouth area, whatever the levels of incomes are in Cape Breton, they should be level. They should be a level playing field for all the people in the province of Nova Scotia. But yet you discriminate by levels by saying, you know, we have older homes in the community. There's homes in my community of Whitney Pier that are up to 100 years of age. There are homes in my community that are been there for, and my colleague will speak later, and the same in his speak later, the MLA for Cape Breton South, and talk about some of the homes in his riding are 60 to 70 to 80 years of age. But talk about how do you get those people to qualify for grants? It's an awful thing when you get a senior that's turned down because she makes $200 over the limit. So what do you tell that lady? We're telling you as an elected official that we want you to stay in your home, we want you to be healthy, but yet your oil bill's gone up. We want you to be healthy, but your light bill's gone up. We want you to be healthy, but your food has gone up. So yet all of these things have gone up around these people, you know, but yet their income has not gone up, but their gross income. But what I'm trying to say is that we have so many seniors and low-income families that are falling through the cracks, Mr. Speaker. They're actually falling in the cracks. And because the income level from 07 is the same as it is in 08. And my point that I'm trying to make here this evening as I stand in my place is that we have to do something to increase the levels for people to qualify for the home repair program. We have to do that in this province. If not for everybody, but at least for the seniors, our most vulnerable in our society. They're the healthy people living at home and that want to stay in their own home. They may need windows, they may need a furnace, they may need a roof. But what we have to do, you know, we have to be able to increase those limits. And I know the minister is going to get up in her place and say to me and say to all my colleagues in the legislature here that, you know, multi-millions of dollars, we put over $18 million for a fact. And I know she's going to say that. Well, I'm not going to argue with how much millions of dollars she's put into the program. What I'm saying here tonight is I'm saying that those income levels for seniors and low-income families must rise. We have to change those so these people can qualify for a $5,000 forgivable loan for a grant. Mr. Speaker, I know they're going to talk about, you know, millions of dollars that we spent, but what I'm saying is these people, these are the people. We had a $187 million surplus this year in the budget. How much of that would have taken to raise the income for people to qualify? All I'm trying to say is that, you know, how much would it cost? How much does it cost each and every year of the $18 million that, you know, we have in the housing grant program, whatever else? How much more is it going to cost to raise that income level so these people can qualify? But not only raise the income level, but make it a level playing field. If somebody lives in the riding, and the old, up until this year, the old level would have been, if you lived in the city of Sydney and you were a senior, your income level would have been $22,000. But if you lived in Cape Breton West, in the old county, your income level would have been $23,500. But this year, the government decided to say, okay, let's make everybody in Cape Breton the same, $22,000. You know, Cape Breton, $22,000, the same in Mr. Speaker, in your riding and my riding. At one time, the seniors in your riding that were on guaranteed income supplement in old age would qualify for that grant because your limit was $23,500 because you were in the county of Cape Breton. But the people of the city of Sydney were $22,000 and would not qualify. So a senior living in the Waterford, a senior living in Glace Bay, a senior living in the county was eligible because the cutoff limit was $23,500. But what the department did this year was said, oh no, all across the province of Nova Scotia, we're going to make that limit $22,000. So, Mr. Speaker, you're going to have people in your riding and everybody else in here that represents the people in Cape Breton or other areas is $22,000 a year of income is now the cutoff for all seniors in the province of Nova Scotia. And what I'm staying in my place tonight is they can put millions and millions of dollars into, and I know the minister's going to go up and say, for a fact, $18 million, multi-million dollars. But what I'm saying is that we need to make sure when they sign that paper for the department to look at their income tax when they apply for that grant, that level has to be increased. And that level should be the same as it is in Yarmouth, the same as it is in Sydney, and the same as it is anywhere else in this province. So everybody can have an equal playing field. Everybody can have. You know what I mean? I just think that this income level is too low. Seniors, $22,000. Now, you're going to see yourself as a member of the Legislative Assembly and my colleague from Cape Breton South, when people in his riding apply and say, are on guaranteed income supplement, old age, and Canada pension, and they're ineligible for this program. So what's he going to tell his constituents, and what am I going to tell mine? That this is the new level as of, and I tabled this in question period on Thursday, May the 1st. I tabled that in this legislature, the new levels. As of April the 1st, 2008, all seniors in the province of Nova Scotia, their income level will be $22,000. Unfair. Let's do something. Let's do it right. Let's make the limit a little higher so seniors and low-income families can qualify for home repair so they can stay in their home and live a good life in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to join the debate this evening on the motion for the late debate, and therefore be it resolved the government increase the housing or the household income limits used to qualify low-income families in Nova Scotia for home repair programs. I couldn't agree with that premise more, Mr. Speaker. My colleague introduced it from Cape Breton Nova, and for many years now we've been fighting the situation with the many people in our ridings, both Cape Breton South and Cape Breton Nova, and some of the other ridings in the Cape Breton area that have experienced a serious situation with the housing stock. The housing stock, Mr. Speaker, in our area is old. The housing stock, some of the homes are 70, 80, 100 years old, and inhabited by senior citizens who have had the homes passed on down to them, and others have lived in these homes and have struggled to raise families in these homes. And in order to avoid having to move somewhere else, or having to move into a public housing unit, or having to move into a senior's home, or having to move with relatives, they've depended on the fact that they could apply to the government to have a grant put in place for necessary repairs. Like a house is no different than anything else. If you don't repair it after a while, it becomes more costly to repair. And if you leave it go any appreciable period of time, then it becomes impossible to repair. But given that fact, Mr. Speaker, the facts are that the housing stock is old, and I think there are probably three categories of calls that I receive on a regular basis. And of course, one is about housing. The others, of course, are about student loans and those kinds of things in our community. And the third one would be about financial assistance to single-parent families. And that. But most of my calls are concerning housing that I get. And those calls are simply put, you have to give them the answer, well, do you meet the financial criteria established by the Department of Community Services and Housing? And many of them will say, as my colleague from Cape Breton Nova alluded to, many will say, I'm $100 over the limit, or I'm $200 over the limit, and there's no recourse for them to appeal that because the limit is the limit is the limit. And there are extenuating circumstances, Mr. Speaker, in all cases, and certainly in the housing stock that we deal with in Cape Breton South, there are many extenuating circumstances, including the fact that a number of emergency repairs are needed on a regular basis in some of these older houses. And as would have it, Mr. Speaker, all of these things usually happen in the dead of winter. The furnace will break down, or the roof gets damaged, or the snow is coming through the windows in these houses. It never happens in July and August. It always happens in January and February. And the other problem we have is that by the time they apply and by the time they receive the assistance, it's usually 2 or 3 months because there's a protocol that has to be followed there. Then the season is over, or the cold season is over, and the emergency is still there, however, but the people have had to live through the coldest months of the year in a lot of cases without getting adequate assistance. The income levels are too small by today's standards. They should be elevated. I don't think there's any question about that, and I think probably the minister will address that problem. But there is a need, a tremendous need for a quicker response time and a quicker turnover from the time that the person applies for the grant and the time the grant is actually given. And I know there's, like I said, there's a protocol there. There has to be an inspector sent out. There has to be quotes received, and all of that has to go to the back to the department for analysis, and then a decision is made. But what's been happening, Mr. Speaker, is that while an analysis is being made, we call up on behalf of the client and we're told, well, we don't have any money. You know, it'll have to be in next year's budget because we don't know what we're going to get in the budget. And of course, budget time is April 1st. You know, and they've run out of money in January, February. The people that need it in January, February can't get it until the next budget year. So then they get in line, get in the queue to try to get the grant. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, they're offered a loan. Yes. That's the quid pro quo there. They're offered a loan at comparable or interest rates that perhaps are consistent with the going rate in the area. But they're not. But the problem is, with the people that are looking for the grant, if they could afford the loan, they'd go to their credit union and get the loan. They went to the Department of Housing for a grant, not for a loan. And the alternative is, well, we can't give you the grant right now because we don't have any money. However, we're in the loan business. We'll loan you the money at an interest rate that we think you can afford and over a period of time. Well, that really upsets the people that I deal with, a lot of them, because they're on minimal income and they can't afford to repay the loan. And you know what? Senior citizens, particularly, Mr. Speaker, are very aware of the fact that the programs are out there, but they don't want to appear that they can't take advantage of them. But I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, what they do accept is the fact that if they're going to take a loan, they're going to pay it back. Senior citizens do pay their bills. And in the case of the seniors that I deal with, they're reluctant to take the loan because they know they can't pay it back. And they don't want to owe a debt. You know, there's lots of people in our society perhaps don't worry about that as much as senior citizens do, but I can tell you senior citizens worry about debt, and they worry about the fact that if they have a debt, it should be paid, and they honor their commitments. But they can't afford to pay it, so they walk away from the Department of Housing with nothing. The loan is not acceptable to them because they can't pay it back, and the grant is not available to them because either the department is yet again out of money, and I go through this each year. The people in the Department of Housing that I deal with are wonderful people, and they want to help people, particularly a couple of people that I deal with there. But they say, look, they've got a long waiting list because of the fact that as I said earlier, our housing stock is old in our area. There are homes there that need tremendous amount of repair, and the people just don't have the money to do that. And what happens is, if you don't tighten up your house, your energy costs are higher. If you don't look after necessary repairs on a regular basis, then they become more expensive as time moves on. And in the case of the people that I deal with on a regular basis, they simply can't afford it. And you know, $22,000 a year to be eligible for a grant, with the heating costs today, and with the costs of living, the costs of groceries, the cost of traveling, they just don't have it. You know, they just, it's too small. You know, the limit should be upped to an arbitrary figure, I guess, would be 20–30% increase, we've been told, in order to allow people the latitude to be able to get the repairs done and to be eligible for those repairs. But I understand it could involve quite a bit of money, and I understand that those kinds of things would be incremental, that you couldn't actually do it in 1 year, but I would encourage the department to give some consideration to incremental increases in those limits so that more people might be able to take advantage of it. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, I think if the minister could do something for my colleague from Cape Breton Nova and myself and the other MLAs, that to have housing, older housing, is to try and expedite the turnaround time by the time from the time the person actually applies till the time the loan is approved. there's an inordinate amount of time passes when the need is there. But actually accessing the funds to look after that need takes a long time. Now, you know, that's probably nothing new about government bureaucracy there, but in the case of wintertime problems, and I think if we could turn around that time needed to get the money actually to the contractor to do the job, it would be appreciated. And I know the minister hears what I'm saying there, and if we could just encourage the people who are receiving the applications and everything, that they would try to turn it around as quickly as possible, particularly in the cold season, and I believe that that would go a long way to helping some of our seniors in particular. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Hants West on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable members for the short interruption. I want to introduce to the House this evening a former resident of Hants West, Mr. Victor Lawrence. Victor now resides in Pictou Centre. Nice to have you here, Victor, and he's been with us a few times here and an avid watcher of the Pledge TV. Thanks.
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleagues from Cape Breton Nova and Cape Breton South for tag teaming on me here this evening to discuss the very important issue of housing and repair programs. I'll do my best to defend the mainland here, and Mr. Speaker, to address some of the issues raised here this evening. Housing is a basic necessity of life. No one will argue that. A good quality house shelters us from the elements and keeps us safe. A home that you can take comfort and pride in contributes to your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. We understand that. Each and every one of us in this House understands that. And that's why we have a menu of housing programs to help low-income Nova Scotians maintain, buy, or rent affordable housing. Now, it will come as no shock to my two honourable colleagues who have both mentioned it, who know all too well about the high rate of home ownership and the oldest housing stock in the country. And though I don't have the statistics in front of me, I would venture a guess that both of my colleagues likely are in possession in their ridings of those old housing stock, Mr. Speaker. And we also have many seniors who want to remain in their homes and extended families that want to live together. Now, this is why we have grants and loans for home repairs, modifications and additions, as well as mortgage funds to purchase or build modest houses. We work in partnership with all three levels of government to make our various housing programs available. In an effort to ensure we are helping those who need it most, many of our programs have financial criteria that determine eligibility. Again, no news to the members who have spoken here this evening. Our repair programs that are cost-shared with our federal partners, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp., have income thresholds which are calculated by CMHC and accepted by the province. Household income limits, or HILs, reflect the minimum income required for a household to afford appropriate accommodation without spending more than 30% of its income for shelter. It varies depending on the size of the family and, yes, as my colleagues have indicated, the location. Household income limits were increased in January 2007, making more Nova Scotians eligible for our housing programs. HIL's regulations for provincial repair programs, SCAP and FERP, as we affectionately refer to them, were updated to match federal provincial repair programs in July 2007. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to reflect for a moment on an issue that was brought up during estimates, an issue that I've asked staff to have a look at, to provide back to me options. For the very issue that the member from Cape Breton South raised was an issue of a sliding scale or an incremental threshold level. And that's what both of my colleagues, and that's what my colleagues on this side of the House say to me as well, that we recognize that there are opportunities for us to help individuals that are cut off at the knees because of, as my honourable colleague has indicated in some instances, a few $100s, which at the end of the day doesn't seem to make sense if what we are trying to do is to assist those families and assist those seniors in being able to stay in those homes even longer. So the option of the sliding scale is one that I look forward to receiving. It's one that I look forward to presenting to my cabinet colleagues, and it's one that I look forward to seeing implemented to ensure that we can address the issue of the location as well as the income limits as it pertains to seniors and to Nova Scotians in general. And of course, I indicated that during estimates to my colleague from Cape Breton South, my colleague from Richmond, and under the leadership of the Premier and the Deputy Premier, who have also indicated an interest in seeing a program such as a sliding scale. I look forward to being able to report that back in this House and to all members. Now, Mr. Speaker, having said that, just because a homeowner is not eligible for a Hills-based program doesn't mean they're not eligible for any assistance. Homeowners not eligible under Hills may be eligible for assistance under the Small Loans Assistance Program. The income limit for this program is $35,000. Providing adequate affordable housing is very important to us. We continue to invest more money in home repair programs. For instance, our repair programs to assist seniors have seen a major injection of new funds over the last year. Almost 1,600 low-income seniors will be able to stay in their homes this year thanks to provincial senior citizens home repair and adaptation programs. And Mr. Speaker, regardless of which political party we represent, we will all agree that helping those additional 450 seniors over last year because of the injection of this new money is a welcome figure. We certainly know we can improve upon that figure, and no one would argue that either. And so again, indicating those 450 more than last year was yet another great reason for supporting and for passing the budget of last week, Mr. Speaker. The additional funds come from the Department of Health through its continuing care strategy. And last year, Health transferred to Community Services $1 million to assist seniors with home repairs. And this year, the contribution jumped to $4 million. And I make reference to that specifically, Mr. Speaker, because it's an acknowledgement that we do not go it alone. We recognize that there are issues between the Department of Health and the Department of Community Services when it pertains to that continuing care strategy, when it pertains to that aging in place of our seniors that is so very important, and that quality of life. And it's for that reason that we're able to partner with the transfer of those funds, and we will continue to do that. Programs such as the Senior Citizens Assistance Program, which provides up to $5,000 in funding for lower-income applicants over the age of 65 who want to remain in their own homes but are not able to afford necessary repairs, are allowing many low-income seniors to maintain their independence. And grants are available for repairs which ensure that health and safety standards are met and may include repairs to roofing, plumbing, and heating. And certainly, Mr. Speaker, the Home Adaptations for Seniors Independence Program offers grants of up to $3,500 to help low-income seniors pay for home adaptations that extend the time that they can live in their own homes independently. And according to recent research, this is exactly what Nova Scotian seniors want. Now, in addition, a number of improvements were made to the department's Access-a-Home program, which helps many seniors. In 2007-2008, a total of, and my honourable colleague was anticipating the exact figure, and I wouldn't want to disappoint him, Mr. Speaker, a total of $18.4 million will be provided through the home repair programs, helping almost 2,500 households. And a total of $6.6 million will have been provided for programs for seniors. And again, without disappointing my colleague, I would also reference that, of course, was approved in last week's budget. This is a clear demonstration of the department's commitment to supporting affordable housing for low-income Nova Scotians. We understand that adequate shelter is a basic necessity. Want to make sure Nova Scotians in need have access to it. We are all here to help. Do we wish we could do more? Absolutely. Resolutions are not enough. We need a cooperative approach influenced by different levels of society, many sectors of the community, the very people who are working to make ends meet every day. This is the only way we will truly make Nova Scotia the best province to work and raise a family, and I look forward to continuing to do that as a unified House of Assembly in the days, months, and years to come, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable the Member for Hants West on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to draw the attention of your gallery, where we have some guests this evening from Hants West. A young band who recently attended a music festival, Canadian Music Fest in Ottawa last weekend, and brought home the gold. So we want to recognize and congratulate them. They're a young jazz band. They Easily Distracted is the name, and I've heard them play many times at numerous events. And
Sounds like me.
their names, this evening we have Patrick Lynch. Maybe they would rise as we call their names out. Patrick Lynch. We have Randy Van Blarcom, Kaylin Campbell, Kelsey Van Blarcom. We have Mr. Kevin Barnes. Accompanying this youth band this evening, we have Mr. Brian Johnson, longtime musician from the area, and former educator in the Windsor Regional High School days, band teacher. We have Mr. Van Blarcom, and I believe we have Mr. Stephen Burns as well with us this evening. Welcome all of you to the house, and thanks for being here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
At the time prior to the adjournment for the late debate, adjourn was moved by the Honourable Member for Halifax Needham. So, the Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to speak this evening on Bill 131, which is an act to implement the North American Agreement on Labour Cooperation. Mr. Speaker, I had to admit when the minister tabled this bill, I wasn't really clear about what the bill was referring to. So I've had an opportunity to get a copy from our legislative library of the North American Agreement on Labour Cooperation. And Mr. Speaker, for the information of members of the House who were unable to attend the minister's bill briefing, this is an agreement that was signed in the agreement on labour cooperation was an agreement that was signed between the Government of Canada, the United Mexican States, so the Government of Mexico and the Government of the United States back in 1993. And indeed, it's not a very lengthy agreement, unlike some of the other NAFTA documents, Mr. Speaker, but it's quite interesting, and I found it somewhat ironic, I have to say, that this government is bringing forward a bill, which we do not oppose, Mr. Speaker, I should be clear about that, but it is ironic that they're bringing forward a bill that empowers the province now as a signator to this agreement to do the following things, Mr. Speaker. I want to read a tiny bit from the agreement itself in terms of what the objectives of the agreement are. The objectives of the agreement are to improve working conditions and living standards in each province's territory, each party's territory. They are to promote to the maximum extent possible the labour principles set out in Annex 1 to encourage cooperation to improve innovation and rising levels of productivity and quality, to pursue cooperative labour-related activities on the basis of mutual benefit, to promote compliance with and effective enforcement by each party of its labour law, and to foster transparency in the administration of labour law. It's the second of all of these objectives are laudable objectives, Mr. Speaker, but it's the second objective that we are subscribing to that I found quite interesting, to promote to the maximum extent possible the labour principles set out in Annex 1. Now, Mr. Speaker, those principles are as follows. The first principle, the freedom of association and the protection of the right to organize. The second principle, the right to bargain collectively, which I've heard the minister stand in his place many times and talk about how his government fully supports the rights of working people to bargain collectively. And the third principle in this agreement is, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure this will come as no surprise to you, the right to strike, Mr. Speaker. And so I thought, how ironic that the Minister of Labour is bringing forward a bill to implement the North American Agreement on Labour Cooperation, which is an agreement that, at whose heart, one of the central objectives is to maximize, to the extent possible, the labour principles set out in this agreement, and one of those principles is, in fact, the principle of the right to strike. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if the minister ever actually read the agreement, given that the government, of which he is the Labour minister, has a bill on the floor of this House, which I believe he is the sponsor of this bill, I believe, eliminating the right to strike of healthcare and other workers. So it's very interesting. It's somewhat contradictory. It certainly is very ironic that the minister has brought forward this legislation at the same time that we have this other bill in front of us. Now, Mr. Speaker, there, I think, are some other questions that I haven't actually heard the minister speak to, and perhaps he'll do this when he has an opportunity. And I would very much like to hear him talk about his support for the North American Agreement on Labour Cooperation, including those labour principles that are a central objective of this legislation. But I also am wondering why it's taken the government so long to sign on to the North American Agreement on Labour Cooperation. This agreement was passed in 1993, and I suspect I've heard different references made that some of the labor leaders in the province will be doing some work in the developing parts of Mexico, for example.
Order, please. Cut the chatter down. It's very difficult to hear the speaker. The Honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I've heard some references from time to time that members of our labour movement here in the province will be traveling, will be doing some training in other territories throughout North America, probably in Mexico. And certainly that is anticipated in this agreement, that we will have exchanges between the various parties to this agreement in a way to enhance our cooperation and in an attempt to not only have an opportunity to hold accountable our different administrations for the labor standards that exist in our jurisdictions, but also so that we will be able to share information, hopefully best practices. Mr. Speaker, there isn't probably anybody in this House who doesn't have concern for many of the working people in other parts of North America, particularly workers in the maquiladoras, which we know very often are sweatshop conditions, and very few labor standards exist for people who work very, very long hours for very little money, quite often live in sort of company-type slum developments on the outskirts of some of the major cities in Mexico and along border communities, and with unsanitary water, housing, and what have you. And it's I think, to our advantage to be entering into agreements where we will attempt to raise the standards of working conditions for people elsewhere. But we also, I think, have to be very clear that we need to look at the kinds of best practices that exist in our own jurisdiction, and sometimes we fall short ourselves. And so it's important that we not see our own situation as having all of the answers. But the principles, as I said, the labor principles that are a central piece of this particular agreement are certainly principles that we endorse here in the NDP caucus. They include protection for migrant workers and prevention of occupational injuries and illnesses, equal pay for men and for women, minimum employment standards, and labor protections for children, for example. These are all very, very important principles, and I think we would all agree on many of these principles, but it's obvious that there are some principles that this government probably support more than others. And as I said, the third principle laid out in the agreement, which is a central part of the objective of this agreement, the right to strike, is one that this government doesn't truly appreciate, and that's too bad. So, Mr. Speaker, we have no opposition to the bill, to the implementation. We just did want to register our noticing that it is somewhat contradictory. Like so many other things this government does, it talks a good line, but when you really start to unravel the threads, you can see that quite a bit of what's going on is talk and not a whole lot of action. They don't seem to have a consistent approach as well. They, on the one hand, on one day they will feel quite justified in coming into the legislature with a sort of a retrograde kind of piece of legislation that has no regard for the human rights and the labor principles for working people in this province in our healthcare system. And at the same time, they will turn around and they will introduce legislation signing on to an agreement that seeks to advance the very principles that they intend to deny the working people in this province of. So I think this is the concern that we would have. It's more with the behavior of the government than it is specifically with this piece of legislation, which we certainly will be supporting, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Preston. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to be very brief with my remarks on this bill. The intent of the bill looks really good, and it's nice to see that we're finally tidying up some of the issues that we have with the free trade agreement, even though the free trade agreement sometimes causes some problems here in Nova Scotia, getting work and not being able to sole source sometimes when it would be convenient for the communities to do that. The only concern I have about this is this bill already in place in Mexico? The reason I ask that is because labor rates are so much lower in Mexico, and from talking to people I know in Mexico, sometimes the environmental issues that they address there, they don't address aggressively as we do in Canada. And I would just ask the minister to answer that question when you get up, if you don't mind, if you possibly can. Other than that, we intend to support the bill. It's a good bill. It's a good bill for Nova Scotia, and it's a good bill for labor in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker, and it's a pleasure to say a few words on Bill number 131. And which deals with labor issues in general and free trade. Speaker, as you'll recall, it's an opportunity to discuss an issue which I've raised in this House before, and which, in fact, we've been able to get changes. Mr. Speaker, it's the issue around pensions here in Nova Scotia and the lack thereof in so many cases. Speaker, you'll recall that we are able to have changes made to allow Nova Scotians to be able to access locked-in RRSPs under certain specific circumstances. And, Mr. Speaker, I received a phone call just a few weeks ago from a lady who was actually from Antigonish, and she called me because she said, I remember that you were able to get changes made to the locked-in RRSPs, and she raised an interesting issue because she indicated that apparently here in Nova Scotia, if you have a locked-in RRSP plan, once you turn 65 and you can draw onto those RRSPs, we actually still put restrictions on you as to how much you can draw from those RRSPs. And the issue that she raised with me, and apparently in New Brunswick, and we're looking into that right now, but apparently in New Brunswick, they will allow you to take up to a certain percentage of your the total value of your locked-in RRSPs to spend as you wish. And the point that the lady was raising with me is she said, look, we help pay for our kids' education, going to university, we've made some improvements to the home, and we're about to hit 65. We'd like to be able to take a lump sum out of those locked-in RRSPs and pay down our debt. Because we don't know how long we're going to live, we don't know how long we'll get to enjoy this pension money, but we want to make sure that we don't leave debt behind for our children. And apparently, we don't allow you to do that here in Nova Scotia. And I know that when we introduced some of the changes to the locked-in RRSPs, I know that the official opposition voted against it, indicating that they felt that people would be reckless in spending their money prior to their pension years. And so they were very concerned about that, and it's certainly a legitimate concern. And we certainly realize that there's very strict guidelines as to how you can access that funding. But at 65, we're still telling people, and we're still putting restrictions in place as to how people can handle their pension money. I was actually quite surprised, Mr. Speaker, about that, and I certainly hope that the Minister of Labour and the Minister of Finance would be willing to look into that, see what other jurisdictions are doing on that issue, and see if there's any way that here in Nova Scotia we can say we'll allow you to take so much out upon retirement at 65, a percentage, and that you can spend as you wish. So I did want to take the opportunity to stand in my place and to raise that issue for the government to consider. Mr. Speaker, I think as well that the Minister of Labour, through this bill and through the operations of his department, has a responsibility as well to look at the fact that in Nova Scotia, and I'm sure he probably has some of the figures, we still have a tremendous amount of our population, our working Nova Scotians, who have no pension plan at all. And in 2008, it's unbelievable that we still continue to see so many Nova Scotians work for so many years and have nothing at the end to show pension-wise for their work. And, Mr. Speaker, I look at my own riding, and I'm sure it's no different in your area. People who worked at the local fish plant for 20 and 30 years, that at the end of the day, when they retire, all they have to retire on is the old age, the Canada pension, and the good old supplement. Now, we all know that the supplement basically is a means where the federal government will bridge what you're receiving through the Canada pension, the old age, to reach a minimum level of income. And right now, that's around $25,000 for a couple. And when I see people that come in and they show me their tax assessment, they say, here is what I earn. And these are people who worked all their lives, worked very hard, and yet they have no private pension plan. And when I look at Richmond County, you know, I'm sure it's no different than many other rural areas especially, that the people have no type of private plan upon their retirement. Mr. Speaker, that affects our whole economy, because when people are living on such a meager amount of money, their ability to spend and to help grow our economy is very restricted. And Mr. Speaker, I know that the government, ironically, again, as I reflect on my 10 years here, when we were in office, the previous Liberal government, we had started the program with the leadership of my colleague from Cape Breton South, the payroll rebate program. And I remember at the time when we went into the 1990 election, the leader of the Conservative Party at the time, Dr. John Ham, said that his government would not be in the business of providing grants or financial contributions to companies who wanted to come to Nova Scotia. Well, that didn't last very long, Mr. Speaker, because I think the Premier, the leader of the Conservative Party then became Premier, quickly realized the competitive nature that we were in, facing PEI, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Ontario, and all the other jurisdictions, and what they were offering. I think he quickly realized that Nova Scotia was not in a position to be able to say, we're not going to offer any incentives to companies to come here. But, Mr. Speaker, what I'm curious, and maybe the Minister of Labour can indicate this, I fully understand the payroll rebate program and how NSBI and other agencies are trying to bring companies here, but are we doing anything as a province to look at what benefits or what pension plan that these companies plan to offer their employees? Because if we're giving them public money, taxpayers' money, to help them come here to start up their business and keep a workforce, couldn't we at least put some restrictions in saying, if we're going to give you taxpayers' dollars, we expect a minimum level of benefits that are going to go to your employees? And I don't know why we're not looking at that. Because, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the government realizes our population is getting older. Soon we're going to have a significant portion of our population over the age of 65. And it's not in our province's best interest for that 65 and older population to be receiving the supplement. Because if they're getting the supplement, it means they have no private pension plan for the most part, or a very meager one if they have one. So we have a vested interest as a province for our economy to try to ensure that there are more pension plans made available to Nova Scotia workers. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I could have raised this possibly under the previous bill, an amendment to the Public Service Act, dealing with the creation or the separation of the Department of Environment and now the Department of Labour and Workforce Development. But I do hope that the Minister will look into the issue I've raised about the locked-in pensions at 65, what's being done in New Brunswick, what's being done in other jurisdictions. And I do hope that the Minister and the government will look at working through economic development, through NSBI, to see if there are not ways that we can encourage companies, when they do come to Nova Scotia, to do make sure that they do offer a pension plan. Hopefully, Mr. Speaker, the days may be over of us seeing defined benefit plans here in Nova Scotia. Very few companies are still offering that type of pension plan. And that is the best pension plan that one could ask for. Now we're more seeing it amongst the teachers, amongst government, and very few industries. Some of the larger ones are still offering it, but I reflect on the fact when we had the legislation dealing with the Trenton railcar plant and Greenbrier and the pension plan for the workers. I remember at that time when the chair, former Premier Gerald Regan, made the comment that the legislation dealing with Trenton railcar plant was going to send a chilling effect amongst businesses in Nova Scotia, and he even predicted that the days of seeing defined benefit plans in Nova Scotia were possibly over. And that's a statement that was of great concern to me and should be of great concern for us as legislators, because we should be doing whatever we can to encourage more companies to set up these types of pension plans, which are in the best interest of their workers and the best interest of the families of those workers here in Nova Scotia. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to go on the record to raise those concerns. I do look forward to the comments from the Minister as to whether he can address some of the issues. I know he's not specifically responsible for pensions, but if he can at least give us a sense of what his views are on the issues that I have raised. With that, Mr. Speaker, as mentioned by my colleague, we certainly will be voting in favour of Bill number 131 moving forward on second reading and on to law amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Chair will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development to close debate on
Thank you very
Bill
much,
number
Mr. Speaker. And just to respond very quickly in the few minutes we have left to the concerns raised by the critics opposite. I do appreciate the comments made by the member for Richmond. We certainly do have a challenge that's shared by jurisdictions across North America on pension plans, and I would encourage him to contact my office, and I'll put him in touch with the Pension Review Committee because he obviously has some interest and some expertise in this matter. There is a pension review committee chaired by Bill Black, including Mr. Pink and also Mr. Crawford. And they are looking at this issue because clearly all of us want seniors who retire to be looked after, and yet there are enormous sort of issues with pensions, and many companies aren't offering them. So I'll certainly offer that to that member because he certainly has some expertise on it. I'm not sure if the member from Preston, to respond to that, I'm not sure if Mexico's signed on to this. I assume they have. I'll check that out and get back to him. One of the reasons we want to raise the labour and environment standards in other countries is to offer a fairer playing field for our own companies, and because it's the right thing to do. And the member for Halifax Needham, I want to thank her for her comments. She asked why it's taken so long. I can't really respond to that. I do know that I've been trying to get this legislation forward for a while now, and one of the reasons that was told to me was that there was some worry that there would be pushback where we wouldn't be allowed, or the Nova Scotia Teachers Union wouldn't be allowed to have the policy where anyone as a teacher had to be a member of the union. And that was part of the concern, actually, that might be challenged if we went forward on this. We did more legal work and found out that wasn't the case, and that wasn't a real worry. But that explains the delay over the past 2 years, that we wanted to make absolutely sure that we didn't harm teacher unions. Anyway, I do want to also respond to the principles on the right to strike. I've always upheld that right to strike, but the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has said that in very particular circumstances, the right to strike can be replaced by fair, neutral arbitration, and that was what we put forward in Bill 1. So I think with those responses to the points raised by the honourable members, I want to thank them for their support as we go forward with this bill, and I close debate on Bill 131.
Thank you. The motion is for second reading on Bill number 131, the North American Labour Cooperation Agreement Implementation Act. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried.
Bill 131, title and act to implement the North American Agreement on Labour Cooperation.
Order that this bill be referred to Committee on Law Amendments. The Chair recognizes the Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will you please call Bill number 156, the Land Registration Act?
Bill number 156. The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. In the few minutes remaining this evening, I'm going to say a few words about the Land Registration Act, the amendments to the Land Registration Act. And members of this House will know that the Land Registration Act established a modernized registration system for Nova Scotia's land title registrar. And what it means is legal documents related to land titles can now be submitted electronically, and the system can be accessed online from anywhere in the world. Mr. Speaker, the new system also made it easier to identify and correct errors relating to land title. Now, having said that, it is a system that's used primarily by lawyers and surveyors, and the technicalities of this particular act are best understood with them and were developed in consultation with them. That being said, that the act does affect all property owners in Nova Scotia. And as I've indicated, the amendments being proposed were developed after a number of years working with the system and continuous consultations with the Nova Scotia Barrister Society and other stakeholder groups. And through the proposed amendments, the Registrar General will have the expanded authority to correct errors in the land registry, to hear and investigate complaints under the Act, hear appeals relating to a decision made by a registrar. And what this means, Mr. Speaker, providing the Registrar General with the authority to hear appeals means that individuals will now no longer have to go to the Supreme Court for an appeal. Other changes to the Act, Mr. Speaker, clarify that once the title to a property is registered in the new land registry, the time-consuming process of searching back through the historic record is eliminated. Mr. Speaker, the amendments will also enhance the integrity of the land title system by improving fraud prevention and privacy measures while at the same time streamlining processes and requirements. The amendments, Mr. Speaker, also clarify the responsibility of lawyers certifying title to land, as well as to clarifying wording to more accurately reflect the intent of the Act. And Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I now move second reading of Bill 157, the Land Registration Act.
Thank you. With the lateness of the hour, could I ask the Honourable the Minister to adjourn debate?
Excuse me. Yes, thank you, Speaker. In view of the lateness of the hour, I would move for adjournment of the debate on Bill 157.
Thank you. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. I move that the House do now rise and meet tomorrow from the hour of 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. As we know, there's some significant events occurring both on either side of the House tomorrow, and a major prostate event and the Red Rally in Bridgewater. So, Mr. Speaker, the government's business following the daily routine would include public bills for second reading, Bill number 79, Bill number 133, 163, 167, 168, 176, private members and public bills for second reading, including Bill number 29, bills also number 150, and Bill number 170. So moved.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for the House to rise and meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The House stands adjourned until